Hey you, thanks for stopping by. The day's done, so let's settle in and make ourselves comfortable. I brought a few stories to share. The spot on the sidewalk that dried last. Out front near the mailbox, there was a small dip in the concrete that always dried slower than the rest of the path. After a storm, the puddle stayed just a little longer, hours, sometimes a full day, when everything else had already warmed and cleared. No one avoided it. No one stepped in it either. It just lingered, quietly, reflecting whatever sky was left behind. Sometimes leaves floated there for a while. Sometimes they didn't. It didn't drain. It didn't cause a mess. It just took its time, and then it was gone. Until the next rain. The table with one leg on a magazine. In the dining room, one leg of the table rested on a thin magazine from several seasons ago. No one remembered placing it there, and no one took it out. The magazine didn't flatten completely, and the table wobbled just slightly if leaned on too hard. But the meals were fine. The plates didn't slide. The chair legs fit underneath. The magazine cover had faded. Something about gardening, or maybe spring travel. It wasn't part of the decor. It wasn't doing a perfect job, but it worked, more or less. So it stayed. The button that stayed in the drawer. At the back of a drawer sat a small black button, still in the clear pouch it came in, the kind that's sewn to the inside of a shirt or jacket, just in case. The garment was long gone, donated most likely, but the button had stayed. It shifted gently when the drawer opened and rolled just enough to make a sound against the pens and the batteries. No one used it, no one needed it, but it never got tossed. It wasn't taking up much space, and maybe one day it might match something again. The paint chip that never got matched. Near the back door, a small paint sample card sat wedged behind a pencil jar. It had been picked out for a room that never got repainted. Some kind of light mossy green, though the name had long since worn off. The corners had curled slightly. The edge faded in the sunlight. No one reached for it anymore. No one had thrown it away either. It wasn't a keepsake. It wasn't a plan. Just a soft square of color resting between intention and forgetfulness. The room it was meant for never changed, and the card didn't seem to mind. The streetlight that came on a little early. At the corner where the sidewalk curves, one streetlight flicked on before the rest every evening. Not by much, maybe 5 minutes early, but enough that it always looked slightly impatient. The bulb wasn't brighter. The light wasn't warmer. It just arrived first. Nobody complained. It didn't cause any problems. Sometimes it caught dust in the air before the others had lit up. A faint shimmer, then a pause, then the rest of the row followed. It didn't flicker. It didn't buzz. It just lit its small circle of pavement a little before it had to, and then stood there until morning. The blind that wouldn't sit even. In the window of an upstairs room, one of the blinds refused to sit quite level. The others fell neatly, overlapping in perfect lines, but the second one from the right always leaned half a slat higher. The cord worked fine. The blind wasn't damaged, just misaligned by a fraction that wasn't worth fixing. Sometimes morning light slipped through that one sliver. making a small beam on the floor for an hour or two, and then it was gone. People closed and opened the blinds without noticing, or if they did, they didn't mention it. The angle stayed crooked, and that was just fine. The drain that watched the weather. At the edge of the sidewalk, just beneath the slope, a square drain rested where the water liked to go. Some days were dry and the drain saw nothing. Other days, the rain gathered and slid in easily, carrying a few leaves or petals along with it. A pebble sat nearby for most of a week and then vanished. No one stepped too close. No one gave it more than a glance. The drain didn't clog or shine. It didn't make much sound. It just waited where the water already knew to look. The fence that didn't close anything off. Behind a hardware store, a low fence ran along a stretch of gravel and dry weeds. It wasn't tall enough to keep anyone out, and didn't mark a clear boundary. The boards were spaced unevenly. One leaned outwards, not from damage, just time. No signs hung from it. Nothing waited behind it. Sometimes wind pushed trash up against it and left it there until someone eventually swept it away. You could step over it without effort, or walk the long way around without noticing at all. It didn't protect anything, and no one seemed to mind. The drawer that's always a little bit stuck. There's a drawer in the table that never opens quite cleanly. It juts, pauses, and sighs. Inside, there rests loose rubber bands, an old pencil with no eraser, one key with no door, and a matchbook with only 2 left. You don't need any of it, but sometimes you open it anyway, just to check, just to remember the sound it makes when it finally gives in. The fan that clicks in 3s. It's not broken, it just clicks. 3 gentle taps, then a pause, then 3 more, steady, like a tiny mechanical lullaby, keeping track of nothing in particular. You think about oiling it, but then it would stop, and maybe you've grown used to the rhythm of something, not quite perfect, but still trying. The box of unlabeled buttons. In the closet sits a tin of buttons. None of them match anything. Pearly whites, marbled reds, one shaped like a fish. They're the kind you save without reason, too pretty to toss, too odd to use. You run your fingers through them and sometimes listen to the soft clatter, like rain deciding what to become. The mirror that warps at the edges. It's not cracked or broken, just curved in a way that makes the corners ripple. When you walk by, your elbows stretch a little longer than they should. Your face bends, then returns. It doesn't feel wrong, only unfamiliar, like the mirror remembers you differently than you remember yourself. The teacup that never gets used. It lives at the back of the cupboard, painted with little blue flowers and a gold rim that's chipped on one side. No one chooses it, but no one throws it away. You pick it up once in a while just to look at it. It's cold, light, and empty, and perfectly fine staying just that way. The light bulb with a mind of its own. Sometimes it flickers when you walk past, not always, just when it feels like it. It's not spooky, just a little opinionated. It knows when you're in a mood. You started nodding to it like an old friend, unsure of who is keeping track of who. The envelope you never opened. It's tucked inside a drawer. No name on the front. No return address. The paper is thick. The seal still clean. You've thought about tearing it open, but somehow the mystery feels more solid than anything inside. So you leave it be. Its silence is enough. The plant that grew sideways. There's a potted plant by the window that refuses to grow up. Its stem leans sideways, like it's chasing something just out of reach. You've turned it once to help. It turned back. Now you leave it alone. It seems to know exactly where it's going. Stains on the ceiling that don't look like anything. Some are round, some are smudged. One has a faint edge like a continent on an outdated map. None of them resemble animals or faces. They just are. Soft, dull shapes that sit above everything, never asking to be seen, but still seen anyway. A patch of carpet that's slightly lower. You wouldn't notice unless you walked barefoot, but even then, it's not obvious. A slight dip, a tired spot. Maybe something heavy used to live there. Maybe nothing did. Now it's just softer than the rest. Less spring, more memory. A loose tile that doesn't wobble, but could. It's flush with the rest of the floor, but you know it's different. The grout hairline's a little thinner. The sound a little duller when you tap. Not wrong, just a possibility, like it's practicing stillness in case someone's watching. The spot where the paint doesn't match. A dab of touch-up from another year. Slightly brighter, slightly newer. It was supposed to help. It didn't. But now it's part of the wall's rhythm. The not quite of it. Like a word spelled correctly, but still wrong, somehow. The clock that's always 2 minutes ahead. No one said it that way. It just drifted. 2 minutes into the future. Not enough to fix. Not worth thinking. You just look at it and subtract automatically. You tell yourself it doesn't matter, but sometimes you rush, just a little. You think you're late when you're not. It blinks quietly on the microwave. On the stove, no colon, just numbers. Always ahead, never corrected. You could reset it, but you don't. The baseboard that's just a little bit dirty. It's always at the same spot, along the hallway where the wall meets the floor. A smudge that comes back after cleaning. Not dramatic, not gross, just gray enough to notice if you really look. You never scrub it hard. You tell yourself you will. It doesn't get worse. It doesn't go away. It's not a problem. It's just part of the wall now. The candle that doesn't smell anymore. You lit it months ago, maybe once. It still looks nice. Still sits on the shelf with purpose, but the wax is pulled from the edges and the scent has faded long ago. You don't throw it out. You move it around sometimes when you dust. It's become more sculpture than candle. You keep it because it feels wrong to toss something that had once tried to be warm. The sidewalk crack that's always been there. It splits near the edge, wide enough for a weed, but not enough to trip on. You step over it every time without thinking. The concrete around it is lighter, older, maybe sun-bleached, maybe just tired. It's not growing, it's not shrinking, just staying the same, unrepaired, unremarkable, a part of the root you'd noticed if it vanished, and you don't know why. The floor mat that absorbs the outside. It lives just inside the door, bristled, flattened, older than it looks. No one thanks it, no one washes it, but it holds the outside back. Dirt, rain, leaves. Bits of the day fall into it and stay there. The carpet beyond is soft and clean. People think they're just walking inside. They don't know that they've already been cleaned. The drawer with instruction manuals. It's full of answers to questions that no one asks. Blenders, remotes, lamps with 3 settings. You figured them out years ago, but the papers remain. Folded, yellowing, crisp edges turn soft. There's comfort in knowing you could read them, but you won't, but you could. They aren't hurting anything, just resting. Proof that someone cared enough to explain once. The parking lot that's always just repainted. It never looks new, but it never fades fully either. The lines aren't fresh, but they're there, always there. You park between them, trusting that someone else checked the spacing. You don't think about the crew that paints them. You don't know when they came, but every year, without being asked, they return. And that's all I have for tonight. The stories have come to an end, so I'll be on my way. Sleep well, and maybe we'll meet again tomorrow.